Hello, everyone. Today we're talking about the topic of burnout, specifically for climate activists. So we're here with Katie Hodgetts, who is a youth climate activist who experienced burnout and decided to do something about it. She's the founder of the Resilience Project, which has inspired 60,000 people around the globe to become resilient change makers. And she's also the author of a new book, Act, Rest, Reset, Repeat. So, Katie, tell us about your own background and how you came to found the Resilience Project at the age of, I understand, just 24 years old.
Mm. Well, hi, Genevieve. It's so nice to be here, and hello to the audio listeners and the people watching. I My background really was in youth climate activism, and I started engaging with the climate crisis when I was about 21. And it was really when I learned that the climate crisis is not just about polar bears on the melting ice caps, which was so what I thought environmentalism was for such a long time. And then I realized that it's actually it's this stage where power is being played out. And actually, the climate crisis was so to do with a small collection of wealthy billionaires capitalizing and profiting off my right, others' right to a fair and just future. It was about gender relations, it was about class, it was about race, and it made me feel extraordinarily hoodwinked and angry. And I thought, okay, what do I do about this? So I held that anger, but I also decided to get active, and I joined a youth group in the UK and particularly started getting involved in really everything I could chew on, actually. So it started with anti-fracking in the UK, and then I was starting to get more involved in system change. I went to a few of the COPs, so I was interested in policy. And then Greta inspired a seismic movement earthquake across the youth landscape. And that was 2018. And I knew that I had some skills that I could offer with my background in campaigning. So I co-founded my city's Youth Strike for Climate movement. And now this was a slightly different kind of organizing because I was working with people as young as 13. And before I was working with 18 to 25-year-olds, now it was 18 and below. And I couldn't believe the levels of despair and
Mm.
hopelessness and burnout that I was seeing in younger generations. And in my group, in my organizing group, a very, very high percentage of us were medicated for depression and anxiety.
Mm.
And I just thought we were promised a life of more beauty than this, you know?
Mhm.
We were promised a life or a childhood of joy and flourishing, and capitalism promised us limitless potential. And here, so many of us were feeling huge amounts of despair, um, and really a crisis of meaning. So
I
when I
mean,
look, go on.
it's interesting that you point out the levels of medication. This is something that a lot of people who talk about climate anxiety maybe aren't even thinking about the fact that this is actually a disease, or it's now being perceived or treated as a disease.
The disease is capitalism. The disease is the loneliness epidemic.
Mm.
Climate anxiety is the response.
Mm.
So when we're talking about climate anxiety and all these feelings, just as an overview for the listeners here, climate anxiety isn't just anxiety. It is all of the physical, mental, and somatic responses we're having to the changes in climate. So that might be fear, frustration, anger, betrayal, and all of these are so valid and legitimate in response to the news. Like
Mm.
if you do not feel those things, I are you listening?
Right.
I feel those things, you know, sometimes I hold these different emotions at the same time. I feel the climate anxiety all the time. So importantly, climate anxiety is not this thing that we need to fix or remedy. It's something that we need to befriend and understand. Because
Mm.
when we can digest the emotions that we're having in response to the world, we can use them as the fuel for action. And it's actually about, which is what I talk about in the book, it's about embracing this vast spectrum of emotions that you may feel in response to the world. Because really, the most dangerous threat we face, as Joanna Macy says, is actually the deadening of our response.
Mm.
It's when we start looking at the news and thinking, nah, can't engage. No, the world's, I probably can't swear. The world's messed up. The world's effed. No, I'm giving it to the next generation. Like that is really, really the most dangerous consequence we have. And the way in which that will proliferate is because we're not taught how to deal with difficult emotions. We're
Mm.
not taught how to alchemize difficult things into positive outcomes. And we see depression and anxiety as computational errors that we need to fix. And in
Mhm.
some ways, depression and anxiety, capital D, capital A, are clinical issues that we need to treat.
Mhm.
In other ways, the depression and the anxiety we might feel is the natural response to looking at a world where we have no trust in leaders, where we have a mental health crisis, where we don't feel as connected to our neighbors, our grandparents, maybe even our friends and family. So, really, my inquisition has been okay, how do we befriend these emotions and utilize them for not just change for the planet, but change for ourselves and our communities?
Now, you founded something called the Resilience Project. Is that meant to tackle these issues or to address these? And tell us about the project.
Yeah, I started the Resilience Project when I was 24. And really, it was to create free support for young people so that there was support around resilience, mental health, inner development that was not behind a therapeutic paywall, which most
Mhm.
support was at that time. And the project remains true to its core, which was founded 6 years ago. And it's really blossomed now into an organization that's trying now not just to address the crisis of mental health and burnout and the youth movement, but this crisis of connection. So we
Mm.
offer these peer support spaces where we can understand ourselves a bit better and find more connection to ourselves, to others, as a vehicle to more connection to people and planet.
Now, are climate activists more susceptible to burnout than others? Because a lot
Mm.
of the things you've just described sound like well, you called it the disease is capitalism, but it seems to me that the condition could be broader than that. But are climate activists, is there something about people who are in this space who are probably more going to be more likely to be burned out than others?
I I've spoken to so many people about burnout, and it's not
Mm.
just climate activists, it's investment bankers, it's actors, it's become so widespread. So burnout is really not just for climate activists or those in the environmental space. But what I find particular about the activist space is
Hmm.
the lack of supportive frameworks for them.
Hmm.
So when I was a climate activist, especially a youth climate activist, I was constantly told that I was a beacon of hope and I was a leader and I was an inspiration. And the
Hmm.
response was positive encouragement. It was keep going. We need you.
Right,
And that was beautiful to be told that, but it also created this shadow of pressure that,
right.
oh my God, it's on my generation to fix this.
Hmm.
And I didn't have a line manager or a boss or an elder
Hmm.
to to help me process and understand that not all of the pressure is on you. You don't
Mm.
need to be doing everything at all times for
Right.
everyone. And I notice in the activist space there seem to be more of these narratives that everything is on me. I
Mm.
care so much, so having a personal life is self-indulgent,
Hmm.
or I won't speak to you if I disagree with you politically, and that leads to alienation and retreat. So there are more of these complexities around the narratives that might sit inside the mind of someone who is very mission driven and mission orientated, which seems to sometimes contribute to an erosion of the self underneath the activist.
Mm,
So we might start to over-identify with our cause so much that we forget, for example, who is the Katie underneath this? What
hmm
does she need? Where are her deficiencies? Maybe she wants to frolic in a field rather than think about the action points from the campaign meeting we had last
hmm
week.
So, so what happens when people burn out? I mean, I think you experienced it yourself, and you think you talked about panic attacks, for example. Tell us, describe a burnout.
I am no stranger to burnout. I have experienced in my life, I would say 2 to 3 burnouts actually. And burnout is the experience of excessive and prolonged stress. So it differs from fatigue or exhaustion, which can be small bouts of manageable and sometimes necessary experiences when we are
Mm,
taking the fossil fuel lobby valued in the billions. Of course, you're going to be exhausted. Of
hmm
course, you're going to be tired. Like sometimes those feelings of exhaustion are the occupational hazard of caring. The problem comes when this fatigue or exhaustion becomes excessive and prolonged.
hmm
So we don't have deep enough roots to hold all of the stress in our branches. And so burnout is, there are so many different symptoms, but it's often when we feel that we cannot no longer carry on. We feel a sense of apathy. We start losing interest in things that we once loved. It might come
mm,
with depression. A typical sign in the youth activist space is this feeling of constant overwhelm. I can't engage with WhatsApp messages,
mm.
can't shower, um, etc., etc.
Right. I mean, one of the things you talked about as well is this constant overstimulation. The multitudes of WhatsApp messages. You wake up in the morning and see all of the notifications, and this resulting short attention span which results from the bombardment of information we receive. So maybe an obvious question is, so why write a book which requires a long attention span to get through? I heard it described by a climate fiction author as a relationship that you're forming with this person that's going to last 2 weeks. So why write a book?
Uh, Can you clarify that question? Clarify that. What do you mean relationship that will be 2 weeks?
So when a person decides to read a book, and that takes
Mm,
perhaps 2 weeks, 2 weeks of
I
that person's time in
understand.
the evening, every evening, going to read another chapter of the book. That person is, and I think it was described as co-creation with the author of an imaginary world. Now, this was fiction, mind you, rather than nonfiction, but it's still, I think the point stands that it requires a commitment. It requires a little bit of a long-term commitment. And in a world where we are looking at hundreds of WhatsApp messages and things on the big screen, on the small screen, and the medium-sized screen, that can take a little bit of a commitment. And it's something I'm always interested in people who have made that decision to write a full-length book. Um,
Mm,
what do you think is different about a book as opposed, how can that serve something that these little messages can't?
that's such a beautiful question. So, in this age where we have structurally prioritized ultimate convenience, we have chosen comfort, and
Mm,
sometimes that looks like scrolling on Instagram or finding our wisdom not from scripture or intergenerational dialogue, but from 30-second reels
mm,
or hiding in Uber Eats, Google Maps, etc., etc. And that has been a hallmark of modernity. And what we have lost with that is our ability for depth.
mm,
And in the same way that there will be no quick fix to the climate crisis, when we're thinking about our own mental health and burnout, there is no quick fix. I'm so sorry. I wish I could give you the 5 minute hack to solving burnout.
Mm.
I would be earning a lot more money if I had that. Really, it is the commitment to depth, which
Mm.
is not just the solution to our own internal battles, but to the climate crisis.
Mm.
It is not self-care when we are just anesthetizing ourselves with the reels or the ice cream or the chocolate. It is self-change.
Right.
The book was written as an homage to less self-care and more self-change. And
Mm.
this understanding can be seen as one wing of the bird. And when we understand what burnout is, we see a little 30-second thing on 5 top tips. That's understanding. But if we fly with one wing, we're going to keep going round in circles. We're going to keep ending up at the same place.
Mm.
Burnout,
Right.
poor mental health, fatigue. The second arm is practice. When you have the second arm of practice, that's what brings the alignment. That's what allows you forward movement, forward trajectory. Writing the book, encouraging people to sit down and read. I also offer practices in every single chapter and highly encourage the reader to engage with the practices because it's not just cognitive understanding that will help and enable us to better ourselves or our campaign work. It's the practice, it's the
Mm.
constant practice. You know, we've all listened to an hour podcast and thought, I'm going to change my life now. And
Right.
we do something for the next 6 hours and then we forget. And then we're back to these automatic responses. And
Mm.
we live in a world where these automatic responses, it's really difficult to not pick up the phone in the morning and just scroll. It
Yes.
takes a huge amount of discipline. And yeah, in the age of constantly choosing comfort over courage, the book is a calling, an invitation instead to pick courage and practice and discipline and doing the hard things and knowing that when we fight the dragon, we get the gold.
Exactly. Now, when we want to become accustomed to doing something in a different way, when we want to change, we have to exercise. And in the book, you have quite a lot of exercises, and in the style of a self-help book, with exercises that people can use to tackle the various aspects of burnout. And I was wondering if you could choose one of these and walk us through it.
Mm. One of the exercises I really love, and it's very simple, is an exercise called flipping the script. So this is an introduction to the idea of narratives.
Hmm.
And narratives are the stories that we tell ourselves. So in a meta sense, a massive narrative we have is around capitalism, which, for example, includes that your productivity equals your worth,
Mm.
or the American dream is another really big story that we have. And these things are that, they are just stories. And what I've seen across the youth movement is that these internal narratives, some which we inherit, some which we create ourselves, are huge contributors to burnout and to climate anxiety. So in the chapter Resist,
Mm.
Reclaim, in narratives, we do an exercise called flipping the script. And really the first part of the exercise is unearthing all of the narratives that might exist in your life, in your movements, in your university groups that are contributing to a negative sense of self-worth or mental health. And some of those which I can reflect from my own experience was especially being someone from the global north, from the UK, I'm too privileged to have problems. That
Mm.
was one of the narratives I had that really stopped me from being able to ask for support. Or joy and silliness is unproductive. I need to give all of myself to the cause.
Hmm.
Anything other than that is selfish.
Right.
Or sadness is bad, is another huge narrative that we have. Whereas the flipping the script exercise is having a look at a different narrative that we can weave into our lives. For example, sadness has something to tell me.
Hmm.
Sadness is a guest in my internal home that has something to say.
Right.
And then when we have that narrative, we're not pushing sadness to the back. We're not trying to do things to get sadness to leave our house as quickly as possible.
Hmm.
We're saying, what do you have to tell me?
Right.
Which is where we can find that deeper levels of introspection. So flipping the script is an exercise to first of all understand some of the narratives that we maybe weren't even conscious of that are contributing to higher levels of stress and exhaustion.
Hmm.
Then redesigning them and exploring what do we open up and what do we close when we flip the script.
Right.
Another example really pertinent to the modern day is cancel culture. And one of the narratives being calling people out. It
Hmm.
feels important for me to call someone out. And that we've seen that time and time again, the calling out culture usually does not bring any sense of relief to the person doing the calling out or to the person being called out.
Mm.
So flipping the script here is calling people in. So if someone has said something that's caused offense or harm, can you call them in a private sense and come with a
Hmm.
level of compassion?
Right.
And then of course there's nuance here. Some things need to be called out. But many things can be called in. It can be done in a very different way that doesn't come from an attack and a place of shame, but comes from
Hmm.
a place which creates mutual understanding and growth rather than more fracturing.
Hmm. So that's the old saying, praise in public, criticize in private.
Yeah, I like that.
I think the HR and management people have came up with that phrase, but that's another field entirely. Um, but let's come back to the people who are experiencing burnout. Maybe before we wrap up, I'd like to ask you if you have one message for people who really care about the climate and maybe are experiencing burnout or at risk of experiencing burnout. Um, what's one thing you'd like to say to those people?
I really wrote this book as a love letter to those people. I see you, I am you, I've been you,
Mm,
I will be you. And the book itself is part memoir of my own story and really part manifesto. And what I want to say to these people is that burnout, we have created this idea that burnout is this thing that we need to avoid and hide from at all costs because of the damage that it does to us. And going through my own journey of burnout, I have a really different idea now of what burnout means to me. And for me to choose to be a change maker and to stand in this space with huge power asymmetries,
mm,
with lose, 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 win, lose, lose, lose kind of feeling of a trajectory, of feeling like being on voting for kindness is being on the
mm,
losing team. That will move you in constant proximity to burnout. Of course it will. It's exhausting. If
mm.
it didn't, and if it was easy, then so many more people I hope would be in the change making space. But you have chosen to be in this space. You have chosen courage. So
Right.
first of all, celebration to yourself. The next is that really now my practice is understanding where I am in proximity to burnout at all time. I don't want to remove burnout from the picture entirely because then maybe I could give a bit more, right?
Hmm.
But I want to understand where I am in proximity at all times. So when I am too close, I have this long, large framework and a great peer support group to know that I can pull myself away.
Right.
But if we are if exhaustion is not even in the picture, I think that's a really unrealistic expectation to have of ourselves when we are in a huge, enormous battle for freedom and liberty and justice. So burnout, there is so much wisdom that comes through nudging up to a
Hmm.
place of exhaustion and learning how to shepherd and steward yourself away from it, learning how to be the compassionate mother to be the best friend, to be the cheerleader.
Right.
And that's why this devotion to introspection and self-awareness is not a self-indulgent pursuit.
Hmm.
It is learning the tools and the skills for a lifetime of change making.
Well, I'm looking forward to the time when I know I've been trying to do the math. You said you were 24 when you founded the Resilience Project, and that was 6 years ago. So I'm looking forward to a few years from now when you write a book called How We Fought the Dragon and Got the Gold. But for now, the book is Act, Rest, Reset, Repeat. And we've been talking to Katie Hodgetts, and thank you very much.
Thank you.